So something very interesting just happened. We got a remake of Playtronic's 2017 flagship title, Yooka-Laylee. Now, remakes come out all the time, that's nothing new, but what's interesting about this remake in particular is that it's a remake of a game that was, well, underwhelming, to say the least. I wouldn't call the original Yooka-Laylee, like, awful. There's plenty of worse games that I could think of, but a lot of people had very high hopes for it as this spiritual successor to the classic Banjo-Kazooie franchise and all that good stuff, and it just really didn't live up to those expectations for a lot of people. Some people did still like it despite its many flaws, but, I digress. My point being that we've come to today where Playtronic has put out a remake of that original game, but with some pretty massive fundamental changes. They've completely unlocked your entire platforming moveset from minute one. They've added maps and fast travel to the game to get around the levels easier. They've removed that mechanic where you have to spend pages to upgrade the size of previous worlds that you've already visited. And on top of that, they've doubled the amount of content within each world from 25 to 50 pages with various new challenges and whatnot to get all those new collectibles. Like, this isn't just a simple port or an upgrade to modern consoles with some new features. This is a pretty fundamental rework of a lot of the basic ideas and mechanics of the original game. And I mean, I kind of love it. Like, I remember being one of the original backers for that original release on Kickstarter, so I was one of the people that was looking forwards to it pretty hard, like many other people. But, I mean, I don't think I ever even got past the first level when I originally played it back in the day. Again, it's hardly the worst game of all time or anything like that, but it just wasn't nearly as good as I imagine Playtronic wanted it to be, and especially in comparison to the other big platformers of the time, I just don't think it really held up. I mean, hell, Mario Odyssey only came out like a few months after it, and it kind of puts it to shame. And, I don't know if that comparison is 100% fair, but facts are facts. And having a big game like Mario Odyssey that was also a big platformer collectathon come out right after it just didn't really make it look good by comparison. But yeah, like I said, this remake really does fix, maybe not every criticism I had of the original, but it's at least a massive improvement that I feel makes the game a much more worthy spiritual successor to Banjo. Sure, they did take out some mechanics that I thought were interesting concepts. Like, I thought that the whole system for expanding the levels over time was at least a cool idea, but when the levels already felt way too big and barren in the base state, making them even bigger only kinda highlighted some of the issues with the level design. So, it was a cool idea, but with bad execution, and I think it's an overall improvement to just remove that system entirely and focus more on making the levels more dense with content and reducing the need to keep backtracking to the same places over and over by having everything available from the start. So, good on Playtronic. I think they did some great work with this remake. But this also reminds me of a somewhat philosophical thought experiment that I, and I'm sure many others, have had over the years, which is, should we only be remaking good games? After all, there are a lot of games that I feel like had a lot of potential for one reason or another, but whether it's a troubled development or a poorly written story or just various other chaotic factors during development, well, they ended up falling flat. Like, for example, I was following Pat Starzat's recent retrospective through BioShock Infinite, and, like, yeah, talk about wasted potential throughout that entire game. Like, it's such an interesting setting with really amazing art direction and a good art style and whatnot, and a generally pretty cool premise, but it's completely let down by boring level design, really basic cookie-cutter gunplay, and just an absolutely god-awful written story. And I can't help but imagine a world, or an alternate universe, if you will, where someone just says, like, fuck it, and tries it again, like, make a new version of the game that has better gunplay with a proper weapon wheel, improve the level design to add at least a little bit more exploration like in the original BioShock, and, just redo the entire story from scratch to maybe have a version that actually makes sense this time around. It's just that the aspects of the game that I like the art style, are just so interesting interesting that I feel like it'd be worth it to give it another go, right? Now it's pretty obvious why companies generally don't do this, why they don't remake bad games. If a game has already come out and has gotten middling to poor reviews, well, then it's probably just seen as way too much of a risk and a waste of money to try and remake that bad game, especially when they could instead milk a game that they already know people love and port that to new consoles and whatnot instead. Not to mention that if the game had problems during development, whether it's due to poor management or a lack of funding or development time or something, well, then there's no reason to think that those problems won't come back to bite them again if they tried remaking that same failed game, even with the power of hindsight. Like, I would love to see another attempt at a game like, I don't know, Mass Effect Andromeda, since I personally feel like they squandered what was legitimately a fairly interesting premise. But given the state of modern BioWare, I don't exactly have a lot of faith in anything that they're going to be putting out, remake or otherwise. The only reason why I think it ended up working so well with Yooka-laylee in particular is that it's kinda the main flagship title for Playtronic. Like, this was the game that they launched their studio with, and Yooka and Laylee are kind of their company mascots. On top of that, they did go on to find better success with the sequel, Impossible Lair, and they went on to be a fairly successful publisher for other smaller games too. So, like, the main problem they had when they were making their first game was mostly just inexperience as a brand new studio, and the fact that it was the studio's first ever game also kind of makes it sting extra hard that it ended up falling so flat. So in this one instance, it really does kind of make sense that they would at least give it another shot rather than moving on to something new. Now that they have a bit more experience under their belt, they can go back to really make something out of the original Yooka-laylee and have it finally live up to the hype that it once garnered. But like I said, it just makes me wonder, like, what if we got other games to have that treatment? Like, what if we got a version of Devil May Cry 2 that actually had good gameplay that understands what the series is about, like the rest of the games in the Devil May Cry series? Like, hell, could you imagine a version of Spore that lived up to even 1% of what people were hoping that game would be? Like, I would love to see a version of that with a lot more time and funding and experience put behind it. But at the same time, I can also admit that I usually prefer when studios try something new, Like, yeah, it would be nice to see what a better and more fleshed out version of these bad games could be like, but I also like seeing studios moving on and trying out new ideas instead of just wallowing in the past forever. So it's one of those things where, like, I guess I can kind of go either way on it. After all, any time spent making a remake of an older game is time spent not making something new, and I guess vice versa. But at the same time, it could just be such a shame to see these cool old ideas just end up getting tossed aside and forgotten to time because, for whatever reason, the game just didn't end up finding an audience. But I think I'll leave it at that for now. It's not a super long video today, I just thought that Yooka Replaylee was noteworthy enough that it was worth getting my thoughts out on it, and this whole idea of remaking bad games in the first place to give them a new lease on life. But as always, I am happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. What do you think about the idea of remaking bad games? And if you could pick a bad game from any time in the past that to get like a big budget remake to try and fix its problems, what game would you like to see get revived like that? Or do you think that this whole idea of remaking bad games in the first place is just kind of a big waste of time, and you'd rather just see developers focus on making something new? I'm also curious if anyone knows of some other examples of games that came out to middling or bad reviews, but still got remakes regardless that vastly improved on the original, or at least tried to. Either way, feel free to let me know about your thoughts down in the comments. And if you like this video, make sure to give me a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. As usual, I've got a link to my Ko-Fi in the description if you want to help support the channel more directly. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.